Hey folks, John Boehm here, the Let's Talk Beef podcast, coming at you today in southern Arizona, where it's a little cool and rainy, but I'm not going to complain because I know what's going on in the Midwest right now, and that sucks. I've been a part of that many times, and I know what that's all about, so I don't envy those guys, and I hope everything's going well, and hopefully the weather turns and starts getting a little nicer over there in the Midwest. But anyways, this week on the podcast, I sit down with Jim and Logan Butcher of Gateway Simmentals in Lewistown, Montana. Spent a couple of days with those guys, spent some time up in the mountains gathering cows, and spent some time they're doing preconditioning shots and whatnot on calves, so we ran a bunch of calves through and got a lot of work done, so it was a good time hanging out with those guys. Learned a lot about the 80s and the 70s, 80s, 90s Simmentals, and going through all that and how they've transformed their operation into what it is now, and just a bunch of great people to work with, and it was a lot of fun hanging out with these guys. So hope you enjoy the podcast, and thanks guys. Have a good one. So here we go. So today we are in Lewistown, Montana, and I'm sitting here with Jim and Logan Butcher of Gateway Simmentals. I'm very surprised at how close the ranch is to the town of Lewiston. I didn't expect that at all. You're in town within 6 minutes. But I'll let Jim do a little introduction and Logan let do a little introduction, and then we'll get into it. So, Jim?
Yeah. I'm Jim Butcher, and I've got, I take care of the cows and half partner in Gateway Simmental with my brother Tom. Diversified farming and ranching operation. I've got two sons working with me now, Brockton and Logan. My wife is a retired school teacher and does what she can around here. We've lived here I'm still living in the same house we lived in when we got married, which was formerly a hired man's house. My dad passed away in 2001 and my mother in 2011, so I guess we've been the proprietors of the place for 8 years now.
That's good. Logan?
Well, yeah, I'm Logan. I'm Jim's eldest son, I guess. I've been back on the ranch, 6 years now? Coming on my 6th year. Graduated from Bozeman and came back, got married, had a couple kids, and now I'm just at home kind of trying to find my way and learn everything I can.
Yeah. How did you guys start? Where does Gateway start, or does it start with Gateway, or was it just a farm before, or what's the history? Kind of how did it start?
Well, actually, both my mom, Darlene, and my dad, Emmett's parents came to Montana in the homestead days. From my mother from Wisconsin and my dad from, or I guess it'd be my grandpa from West Virginia via Colorado. My grandpa Harry, which was my dad's dad, he went from West Virginia to Colorado, and they were ranching around Vail, Colorado. It's either Vail or Aspen, I can never remember. But anyway, he had brothers and other family along with him there, and he wanted to break out on his own, so he came up here. And so he was putting everything together a lot during the 30s. And I think my grandpa Gardy on my mother's side did the same thing. And back then, if you had lots of ambition and were good with managing help and whatnot, you could get more land very easily from the other homesteaders that either starved out or couldn't take it or whatever. So they put together ranches in the around Winifred, Montana, and they built up a fair amount of holdings, and from there, my grandpa Harry died in '55, and then my dad took over out there, and he'd always wanted to trade the ranch out there for a place closer to Lewistown and where it rained more and the water was better. The water was always a huge issue. It was kind of gumbo and lots of alkali and those types of things.
How far is Winifred?
40 miles north of here.
And it's that different, just 40 miles.
Yeah. And then so then he started AIing cows around 1960, trying to improve his, we were just coming out of the dwarf mini cattle deal back then. And so he wanted...
Can you elaborate? So for people that don't know about the dwarf thing, what's that?
Well, that was these little tiny calves that wouldn't grow. It was actually a genetic defect. And as the breeders back then were wanting to make their cattle shorter and thicker and fatter, and they, there was a defect that came along with that called dwarfism.
Is that like across all breeds, or was it a certain breed?
Hereford and...
Well, I think Hereford, since there was the most Herefords back then, they were the most notorious for it, and that's what we had.
Okay.
So then, so we started AIing in the early 60s.
Ampules and all that stuff?
Oh, yeah. In fact,
Filing
we
them
still
down.
used ampules
Do you really?
back when I was AIing, or in the early days of my AI stuff.
So it's been a while since you used an ampule?
Yeah, it's probably been 20 years.
Still got some in the tank, though.
We still, yeah.
Do ya?
Yeah.
Some old Simmental stuff? Or?
Yeah. But anyway, so then in '68, he went to a meeting here at the bank in Lewistown and met up with Travers Smith, who imported Parisian, the Simmental bull, and bought 50 units in the fall of '68 and AI'd it. Let me see. No. He would have bought it in '60. The first Simmental cross cattle we grew were born in '69. So
So you were crossing Simmental and Hereford.
yeah, and they were predominantly all, I think the first year, we had a few black cows back then, we got a few the second year. But the first year they were all bred to Hereford cows. He was impressed with how they blew up the Hereford, there was such a significant difference in the calves versus the Hereford calves.
Mm-hmm.
And so he went on with it for, well, till now. We've had a lot of modifications through the years,
Yeah.
but
Those horned Herefords?
yes, sir.
Yeah.
And the 70s were a very interesting time. It was really a boom and bust period. We had our first production sale in '73 in a tent at the fairgrounds in Lewistown. And the prices that we received were unbelievable. And so we went, and there was a lot of other breeders at the time breeding Simental to commercial, mainly Hereford cows back then. So him and some of his buddies bought a lot of heifers and bred them, and we had more to sort from. But then, and we had a few good years there, and then all of a sudden it wasn't such a good thing. We had too many of them. People, you see, back in those days, there was no EPDs, there wasn't, you're coming from a base of cattle that had been, too many of them had been selected for being small and squatty, and there was no way of knowing what kind of pelvic area or there was no, it was totally unknown. It was just like throwing a dart at the wall as far as what you were going to get. It didn't matter whether it was color, shape, size. We didn't know if the Simmentals had decent maternal calving ease or not at that time. And so it was pretty much a crapshoot.
Yep.
But as we came along, I remember in 72 when we must have had 150 heifers or so to calve out. And our best friend was our local veterinarian named Dr. Klein. We were calving out these Parisian a good sized bunch of them.
Was he calving these, or you didn't know?
Had no idea. Nobody knew back
then.
So
you just bred them.
And anyway, we bred them to a bull called Sultan, and we had 24 C-sections that year.
Oh, man.
And we weren't the Lone Rangers back then. And so that was kind of the beginning of the end of the first phase of the Simmental business as far as the potential for growth was the work that was required to get these things out. And,
Yep.
we'd get bigger calves and lots of that, but a lot of producers decided it wasn't worth the effort and probably went more back to what they were doing.
Yeah. That's a lot of 24. That's crazy.
Yeah. And then had all these heifers, and anyway, that didn't turn out to be an overly great money-making venture there as but we were still committed to the Simmental cattle because we liked some things about them. I think my dad really he liked the breeding stock business, and it was no different back then than it is now. You meet great people, interesting people, make good friends in the business. The purebred business is a lot about the people as well as the cattle.
Uh-huh.
And so then in late 70s, that was somewhere in that area is when the Angus bug kind of hit. And one of the great things about them at that time was that they had calving ease. They were all the same color and they were polled.
Yeah.
And so breeders could take producers, I should say, could take a group of cattle that were crossed up with lots of experiments and they were laced with heterosis and breed them to Angus, and they'd get a polled calf that was, a lot of them were black, some of them were Smokies back then because a lot of the Simmental base and some of the Gelbvieh and Charolais, of course Charolais have both diluter genes, but they'd get some Smokies, but if they were polled, were born much easier. And then it snowballed. But part of the advantage, I always tell people back then, the heterosis was so huge that the breeders were getting because of the cross, it was, you had a crossbred cow bred to a outcrossed sire. So anyway, people were getting the benefits of the calving ease and the ease of raising the Angus sired calves, and then capitalizing on the crossbred cow. So that worked, I think that was part of the reason how Angus kind of took over the U.S. cattle business at that time.
Yep.
And 78 was the year, I know, and I hand it to the Angus people for creating CAB, Certified Angus Beef. That was some real foresight, and I'm sure it was a big struggle for those people trying to come up with it, but it's hard to believe that, we still don't seem to be getting enough certified Angus beef. The demand for it's going on and really all it is a locker sort, and the animal has to be black, or at least 50% black. So, but anyway, then back in '79, I think, after the, we all knew the color thing was an issue because it was a box of chocolates. You just didn't know what you were going to get when you used a Simmental bowl. And so then '79, he went up to...
This is your dad?
Yeah, my dad went up to Bab, which is right next to Glacier Park. I can't remember the fellow's name. He bought these heifers, but there was a abundance line of Simmentals, and there was a bull called ZT Zazu that was a dark red goggle-eyed bull, and when you bred him to Red Angus cows, you'd get a lot of straight red and red baldy cows or calves, and so he bought a bunch of those heifers, and then at the same time he went and got what he thought was some pretty good Black Angus heifers, and so we were thinking we were going to try to raise the solid colored cattle clear back then.
Mm-hmm.
But it never, it just never caught on, and so timing wasn't right, and so we kind of went the other way, started raising them bigger and longer and taller, and when you didn't have a pigmented bag and a variety of colors and whatnot, growth was kind of the main thing, and it didn't matter about birth weights, and we did have a fairly decent bull sale or bull business back in the late '70s. A lot of times it was, I would say we were probably selling 120, 130 bulls back then.
Really? Wow.
But then in the '80s...
Are you taking any data during this? Like birth? I mean, are you weighing anything?
Oh yeah.
So you're doing all that?
Yeah, we were involved in the performance movement. What was that we weren't... Dad wasn't one of them guys that was in... wouldn't be called a founding father or anything of the performance movement, but he had friends that were, and we were trying to implement some of that as we went. But we kept good records.
Okay.
And then in the '80s we started showing cattle more.
Where were you going?
In the state, and you see, I was young enough to do it then, and liked it at that time, and so
I think that's a common thing most people say.
And then
at that time.
But we'd go to Agribition, and we had Calf Champion Bull up there in '84, and then we raised a bull that was reserve champion in Denver at one time. It was a little later. But we went to the Denver Pen Show with bulls for 15 years or so.
Really? Wow.
And we'd always have, it seemed like too many. I don't know why I always thought I had to take 10 or 15 bulls down there. But anyway, seemed like you spent the month of December getting ready. Then you're gone month of January down there, and then you didn't. It was kind of a mixed bag of whether you'd call this success or not.
Mm-hmm.
So we went through that phase, and we weren't color conscious through the '80s, and then by the time '88 or so rolled around, there just wasn't much demand for Simmental bulls. There was still a decent female market, and you cannot have a decent sized ranch and rely on a female market to make your livelihood. So we went, in '88 when we were in Denver, our friend Jim Nickerson from South Dakota had met a fella named Tim Hamilton, and he'd bought his brother's ranch and family ranch in Pierce, South Dakota. And he'd put together he'd bought 1,000 or so black cows, and he'd ended up with 4 black Simmental cows. And Jim Nickerson had bought a bull called Black Max. Jim Nickerson raised a bull called Black Max. And in the late 80s and early 90s, he calved too hard, but they were good-looking cattle that grew, and a lot of people used him. And Tim had bought all the other brothers to him. They were from a flush. And he was picking up black Simmental bulls wherever he could find them. There weren't a lot at that time. I think he started around 1986, starting to accumulate these. And so I met Tim in Denver that year, and we kind of hit it off, and Tim came up with the idea that if I took these heifers out and transplanted them, I could have the heifers and he'd take the bulls, and we could get started in this black program.
Mm-hmm.
And then in '89, Steve McDonald, Circle S, Simental, and Three Forks had a dispersion sale. And so we bought a semi-load of black and red cows from that, and that helped us start making our herd more solid colored.
Uh-huh.
So then I told my dad, I've been into this since I was a 10-year-old kid. We had to do something or else go do something else. And we had, at that time, there was a guy named Lyle Monker that had a propane fertilizer company in town. He was trying to get my brother and I to buy it and go into the fertilizer business. And we didn't, we're cow people and farmers. We didn't really want to give up. We'd been through the 80s, which was absolutely...
I was going to say, how was the 80s for you guys going through?
Well, it was terrible.
Yeah.
I mean, we almost lost everything. I know we'd bought, when we traded our ranch from Winifred in '78, we sold it on a contract, and then to get some of the land we wanted down here by the foothills of the Snowy Mountains, we had to buy that. We had to use cash, and that's right when the interest rates started going up, and you were thinking back then that one had financed the other, and the interest rate spread between the contract and the variable interest rates we were paying back then, sure added to the hardship. But it was a time when it didn't rain a lot. They were very hard times. Mm-hmm. I was in my 20s during that time, and good thing I lived at home with my mom and dad and didn't get married till I was 30. Because it would have been really tough then, but we just kind of learned to live on nothing and did our thing. And so anyway, but I don't know if I mentioned it, but we bought the headquarters place that we call headquarters place now in 1972.
Oh, okay.
And sold the ranch we had at Winifred in 1978. Bought our mountain place in '79, and then bought some farmland surrounding our home place in 1980. But really, it was just a deal where we had too much debt and a spread in interest rates, and it was just hard.
Yeah.
So anyway, so then in '89, we bought these cattle. We gave up. We decided not to go in the propane business, and we really went whole hog after this black Simmental business. There was a few others doing it that were ahead of us in the game, but really it was wide open. I mean, when the cow herds in this area were all black, people were liking the black cattle.
Mm-hmm.
You had to have something that were conducive with them, but really we'd always thought that the Simmental was a maternal beef breed. So, but you couldn't talk maternal to anybody unless you had a pigmented face and pigmented udders, and they were relatively easy calving, and so that's where we really did a lot more research into the crossbreeding, and it was a struggle to find any, the amount of genetics that were available that were Simmental back then was very scarce, and so it was our idea that we just had to manufacture our own seed stock to get us further down the road and improve. So that's when we were probably putting in 200 embryos back then out of the cattle that we'd raised and started with through Tim Hamilton and these Circle S cows.
Mm-hmm.
And it worked pretty darn good, but we still had the big thing that we wanted, and the black Simmentals back then, and if you look back at the EPDs and some of the cattle that we used from the early 70s till the mid 90s, they didn't have what we were looking for. We wanted calving ease, moderate size, easy doing, have another black animal for producers to breed their Angus cows to and get hybrid vigor, improve their herds. And we've had some real dedicated people that have believed in us and stayed with us a really long time, and that believed kind of the same concept as us. But so anyway, we struggled along in the 90s. Then we're into the 90s, and we're doing all this transplanting, and I think we quit showing about 96, 7, something like that. So we were getting our black cattle exposed around. And then I think one of the biggest mistakes we made, of course, you never know, hindsight's 20/20, but
Yep.
one of the biggest mistakes we made back in the early days, of course, I don't think we would have been able to sell them anyway, but the goal was always to breed up to purebred.
Yeah.
And when we kind of got this new start in the 90s, late 80s, I didn't want to get too carried away with the purebred thing. So we were getting some half-blood bulls, raising a few, and bringing some back from Tim's South Dakota ranch to sell. But they weren't papered. The dam side wasn't papered. And really, the EPD business, there's still a lot of non-believers in EPDs. But we probably believed in them as much as anybody, but such a new concept, and people just hadn't bought into it enough yet then. It was too early in the whole process.
Yeah.
And so we went along and we're selling, around 100, maybe a few more bulls through the 90s, and having good success. And actually we were running out of our lost carry forwards through the 80s. And then in the late 90s, we kind of had a purebred base, and we were only selling 100 bulls, and our ranch is big enough to sell 200 or 300. And so we wanted to make a go at selling more of these hybrid bulls. And we were doing a lot of, at that time, Jim Leachman was kind of my hero, and we'd go down there, study his program, and go through what he was doing, because he was really as far as I was concerned in this part of the country anyway, he was kind of the godfather of selling hybrid cattle. And we had our taste in cattle were very similar, so we learned a lot from what he was doing.
Yep.
And liked what he was doing. And so we'd go down to their sales, and I think I might have met him before then, but anyway, we got to be friends in sometime in the 90s, going down to Leachman's sale. His name was Stan Grad. Name of his ranch was Sauter Glen Farms in Airdrie, Alberta. And he kind of started selling these hybrid bulls up there, and he told me one day, Jim, you aren't going to get very far selling these hybrid bulls until you put a name on them. And so I got to thinking about that, and then I got to thinking you kind of needed a headliner bull to start with it. And so I think it was in year 2000, we raised a bull called Lucky Charm that was a 3/4 semi, 8th Tarrantay, 8th South Devon. It was kind of ironic how we ended up with that particular bull, but back in the early 90s, my dad, he loved going to those Leachman sales, and I said, geez, Dad, look for some nice moderate heifers that don't have any Angus in them. And you never sent my dad to a bull sale to look at something, and he didn't come home with something. And anyway, he brought home 11 of these moderate-sized South Devon Tarrantay crosses. And
kind of like you.
yeah. And then so then we had those cows for several years, and really there was an A70.
Were they solid colored?
They were solid red and polled.
Okay.
And really, we started feeding our own cattle in 94. Well, we started selling our feeder cattle on Superior in 87, I think. And then in 94, everybody was saying how bad carcass-wise the Simmental and crosses thereof were.
Mm-hmm.
So we decided that we had to prove what we were raising was competitive in the industry.
Yep.
So that started in 94, and then after that we were feeding the calves out of these South Devon Tarrantay cross cows, and to be honest, they seemed to have a lot of back fat, didn't have a lot of ribeye, and didn't have a lot of marbling either. And so we ended up using most of them as just recips or whatever. But there was an A75G cow she was just kind of a model cow, and we bred her to 600U a few years after, and she'd had a daughter, and at that time, somewhere in about 97, we decided to breed whatever we had that was 600U to Lucky Buck, which was a bull that we bought from Leachman's in 94. He was born in 94, and it was 95, somewhere in there.
600U, he was a Leachman too, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Leachman 600U.
Leachman Lucky Buck 7049C, and I'll never forget Seth Leachman says, well, I bought this heifer to use on my heifers. I needed a heifer bull. And he had a 98-pound birth weight and grew like crazy. And we turned him out with heifers, and he calved great. But he had a tendency to throw some white. And that's another whole story about how some of the history of our place, because... But anyway, so we ended up just using Lucky Buck for a cleanup bull and a heifer bull. He ended up being, at that time, really good on calving ease. And then probably when he was about a 4-year-old, and we were looking at the EPDs and whatnot, and the cattle, they were born light and grew good. And so he was kind of our first introduction to what most people call spread bulls now. Calving ease with good growth. So anyway, we bred all the 600 ewes to Lucky Buck, and we raised Lucky Strike and Lucky Dice, which were fairly influential bulls in the late 90s and early 2000s. And then Lucky Charm was born in 2000, and we raised a Lucky Strike son that same year named Lucky One, and he's still one of the highest marbling purebred Simmental bulls in the database. But this Lucky Charm was a 3/4 Simmental, but he had no Angus in him.
Mm-hmm.
And so we decided that we could start now, and we put a name on our composite cattle called Lucky Cross, and Lucky Charm was the headliner.
Yep.
And people love those cattle. You know, calf good, deep bodied, well structured, heavy muscled. The others probably were the downfall as far as he was good at about everything except he carried a horn gene, and the others weren't that great. So that's how when we formed the Lucky Cross program, I set parameters for what we were going to do to keep us on task.
Okay.
So Lucky Cross was going to be focused on calving ease, moderate mature size with well above average carcass traits.
Mm-hmm.
That was the main mantra of the whole concept.
Yep.
But that we wanted them to stay as outcrossed Angus as we could to ensure the people that bought our bulls would have
The hybrid vigor.
the hybrid vigor. And so that, you know, and then a few years later, the Simmental Association, they decided to, they were starting to embrace the membership, not the association, but they were beginning to embrace the whole hybrid theory, and Jerry Lipsey and Marty Ropp were very instrumental in that, and they trademarked the name Sim Angus, but I stayed with the Lucky Cross name for one. I didn't want to be limited to Angus.
Yep.
And it seemed like it was hard to merchandise outcross cattle when you had Angus in the name. So we've stuck with the Lucky Cross name, and a lot of people, that's what they call our cattle, Lucky Cross. And so it's caught on, and it's given us some product differentiation from the other hybrid bulls, like Leachman's back in that time frame were marketing stabilizers and that type of thing. That was kind of the deal, and then it just progressed as we, and then a few years down the track, we ended up raising GW Premium Beef 021 TS, which he'd be, that was about in '08, I think, or no, would have been before then, '06. And back then you find a bull you really like. I think we bred 200 head of cattle to him, or got 200 calves the first year out of him.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of that, even though he was out of a Lucky Charm cow, we bred most of the Lucky Charm cattle to him.
Yeah.
And then the next year we raised a bull called GW Predestined 701T, and that really, that combination of bulls really improved our cattle and our customers' cattle, and gave us a lot of credibility at the time. Now we're just, it's just trying to perfect it and make the cattle better.
Yeah. Going back, so how did the name Gateway come about? How did you get that?
Oh, well, back in the early '70s when my dad decided he wanted to be in the Simmental business, he couldn't call it Butcher Simmentals. And so we'd sit around and BS. We knew we had to come up with another name. And we started out with silver. My dad always carried 2 silver dollars in his pocket everywhere he went. I mean, he'd wear couldn't even see the year or whatever.
Uh-huh.
But he always said he liked jingle in his pocket. So we were thinking of calling it Silver Dollar Simmental. And then I don't know, maybe it was somehow Gateway came out and says, geez, maybe it's a gateway to good cattle. Stuck, and that's what we named
Here
it.
you are. Huh. And then what's your brand?
Just an EB on the right hip.
Where does that come from?
Well, my dad got that brand. When I was a young kid, my grandpa Harry's brand was HB Quarter Circle.
HB Quarter Circle.
The quarter circle underneath. And that was a 3 iron brand. And he wanted a 2-iron brand, and I don't know, he found this EB with the E attached to the B at the top. It was a 2-iron and liked it, and I have had no desire to change it.
Yeah.
On Tom and I's watch. So
2-iron means you have to use 2 irons to to make it.
yeah,
Okay. I don't know. We don't have brands in Minnesota,
Yeah.
so I don't.
yeah. And typically the brands are fewer irons. The more expensive they are to buy, and the more value they have if you want to sell. It'd be ideal to have a 1-iron. But this is pretty close. And now in the day, electric irons and stuff, and
Yeah.
And it doesn't blotch too bad.
that's another thing on brands is you try to have something that won't blotch too bad.
Okay. What do you mean by blotch?
Well, like on a bee, if you get the hide too hot, or else the animal's a little wet, or the iron skids around a little when you're branding them. Like the bee, it just filled the holes in the bees and fill in with burnt hide just like the brand, so it'd just
Okay.
be a blotch.
Huh. So do you have your own brand?
No, sir.
No? You're just sticking with the EB or?
My son Brock's got a brand, but I told him that Gateway sells bulls with an EB. I don't know what he's gonna do with it. Maybe he'll
Ran his cows or something.
he'll put it on his cows. But
So he just went and got one? He just wanted to get a brand or what?
yeah,
Yeah. He
Yeah.
just felt like he needed one?
yeah, he wanted one.
Huh.
So he's got one.
So you got anything to add to his story so far? Did he miss anything?
Well, he pretty much covered it, I think.
Yeah.
I can't really think of much else he missed as far as the kind of history and all that.
Yeah. Tell me about the mountain ranch.
Oh, well, it's
Your wife made a cheat sheet, so if you want to look at it, you can look at it.
No, I can remember some of it, but
You want to
I'm
see
not
it?
going to go into any major depth. But my dad always wanted to own. When you live out in the close to Missouri Breaks, you're always watching the rain follow the snowy mountains.
So we're surrounded by the snowy mountains, or
the
just
snowy
those
mountains
that
are
range
the
right there.
range south of town.
okay.
And so he always, that was just, and I got to hand it to him. He had a lot of guts to just relocate, because I can't imagine going through that now. But when he bought this home place in 72, he was, and then we had another nice lease place about halfway between Winifred and Lewistown. It was a great ranch. It was a little better than the one at Winifred.
Mm-hmm.
But he was, when we were out at Winifred, well, I should probably go into that a little bit. You see, in 64, him and Mom bought a house in town because he wanted us to go to school in Lewistown.
Yep.
And I don't know how the people at Winifred felt about it, but anyway, that's what he thought was best for us kids. So I think my oldest sister, Chris, was like in 5th grade, and I was in, or 6th, and I was in kindergarten. He moved us to Lewistown, so he was commuting. He'd live at Winifred during the week. Well, he'd live there most of the time. I think he had bowling night on Monday night, so he came in then to
Can't miss bowling.
get a little excitement in his life or whatever. But then us kids, we'd have to get in our station wagon and go to Winifred every weekend.
Yep.
And he was shopping, I'm sure, all along for a place to buy around Lewistown, and then it worked out to buy this Carmichael place in 72. And then I think I was in 7th grade then, and so then we lived here, and he still we lived on this place. So we were pretty scattered out. You know, we had 3 different places, and he was trying to keep it all together. And
How did this come up for sale?
have no idea.
You have no
I think Ivor Carmichael was getting old
Yeah.
and didn't have any family that were interested in it. I think it's the main thing. So he sold us the place, and we've been developing it ever since. Bought a few sprinklers in '76, I think it was, and I don't know.
So the mountain farm, the mountain ranch. What about?
Oh, okay. So anyway, sorry. But anyway, the mountain ranch, that's what he really wanted, to go with this, and then he could sell the place at Winifred. But anyway, it worked out that we could sell the place at Winifred, and I think he must have had I can't remember, but must have had a pretty good idea or something that he was going to get that mountain place when he sold the other one. It was quite run down place. It was an old historic ranch that time, and the fences were bad. I mean, there was 0 infrastructure up there. And so, like in my college years and that time frame, you know, we had to build a cabin and tear down all the old stuff, and through the 80s, and 90s, we were rebuilding fence. My dad liked the fence. I don't know whether he liked it that much, but he liked the result of a good fence.
Yeah.
And so we, you know, probably spent 20 years fixing it up after we'd spent, you know, kind of got this place more figured out. But it's a great place, and it rains a lot. You know, there was a lot of weeds up there. I think in the late 90s we started, somewhere in the 90s, we started helicopter spraying to try to, you know, it's too rough to have ground rig spray up there. So, you know, we'd budget a certain amount a year and spray weeds, and it's really paid dividends. And now we're going over it again, trying to contain the weeds and keep them you never get rid of them, you keep them under control.
Yeah.
But it was an old historic place that was founded by Richard Austin Harlow. That's why it was named the Harlow Ranch. And he was a railroad entrepreneur, magnate, or whatever you want to call him. And there's a lot of history about that place, because he was a successful guy and married to a movie star, and he built tennis court up there and big bungalow, and
There's 29 buildings up there or something.
yeah.
There's a pile of buildings, and
I mean, and to raise cattle year round in the Snowy Mountains, I mean, it took a huge group of men to operate it. And he actually introduced Timothy grass up there. I don't know where he got the idea of that, but there's a lot of Timothy grass up there now that he'd introduced way back.
So how big is it?
There's 4,000 deeded on that place.
Oh.
And then there's Forest Service and a little BLM to go with it.
But he'd winter up there and all that. He just stayed there.
Yeah. And through the years, you know, our cows are really adapted well up there. And that's something, you know, there's lots of grass.
doesn't get
You
too
know,
hot.
if they work, there's always plenty to eat, but it's good at sorting hardy cattle from non-hardy cattle. You know, even though there's plenty of grass all the time up there. You know, they get in the bigger pastures and they have to walk a ways to water and rocks and
Yeah. I saw it yesterday. It's got some rocks.
yeah. So, but anyway, I don't probably need to elaborate a whole lot more into it, but it's been good. A lot of our friends have enjoyed, you know, customers or whatever, friends, relatives have enjoyed the atmosphere up there.
Yeah, it's a cool place. I'm excited to go back up there after this podcast.
And you even got to AI some cows up there too.
Oh, that was probably those were the years that I'd like to forget, and probably why I hate, I shouldn't say hate, my body isn't made for them anymore, but for many years during college, I'd get home from college, and of course I only went to one spring quarter, but I was in charge of AI and our cows up there. We bought the place in '80, so from then on, and we'd take portable pens up there and put our warm water in our thermoses and get on our horse and ride up and gather the natural heats and pen them and do all the AI and up there.
So you just walk around the cows, look for a cow in heat, and then walk her back up to the barn.
Well, a lot of times they didn't walk.
Yeah. Yeah.
So anyway, my dad was pretty anal about the way we rode horses when we were young, because he made us ride bareback till we were 13, and he said you can't be any good on a horse unless you can ride him bareback. Mm-hmm. So we'd been, when we'd used horses all pretty much exclusively when we were kids, so we'd become pretty decent horsemen, and so there wasn't too many that we couldn't get into that corral.
Uh-huh.
And I had a college friend help me one summer, and maybe 2 summers, and a retired school teacher. Whoever had come up and live with me,
How long were you up there for?
it was a 6-week deal. So we'd have 400 or 500 head of heifers and cows, and rotate the pastures and move our portable pens, and 3 times a day we'd walk up that mountain.
Jeepers.
And I don't know. As soon as I found out there was a way to do something other than with a horse, I did it.
Wow.
And the one thing about when you're riding in the mountains that a lot of people don't think of, especially if you have to go 6 or 7 miles to start rounding up cows and stuff, your horse is always tired, because you had to do all that climbing to get to where you had to do the work.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like from the cabin to the AI pastures, like 650 vertical feet or something.
Yeah.
So to even get there.
Yeah, so anyway, I was tired of tired horses and
Wow.
all that kind of thing.
So you've got 2 boys back.
Yep.
So where does Gateway go from where you are now? I mean, is there new endeavors coming or new ideas?
No, we're all fully employed. I don't think I'm a firm believer in the law of diminishing returns, and I think we're plenty big.
Yeah.
This ranching, when you got a certain amount of equipment and you think about expanding, you not only have to buy more land or rent more land, but you got to buy more equipment, and pretty soon you're having to have 2 swathers and 2 balers and more help. So we really don't really have any desire to expand from where we are now. I'm just trying to teach these kids. Hopefully they can carry on what I put my brother and I and my dad, and keeps the family from the cattle and ranching business.
Are you doing anything different with the cattle at all? Trying anything different with them? Playing different things?
Oh, I always like to say we look around for ways to broaden the genetic base. And we're trying some different bloodlines, and we have a lot of success, kind of creating our own herd bulls. And I kind of went on a spending spree this last year, bought 3 bulls, just trying to get some new bloodlines kind of thing. So
Always looking for something to add.
yeah, because I think in the future, this, it just doesn't seem like the margins are getting a whole lot bigger, and probably aren't going to get any bigger in the future. And you guys got to figure out a way. So many people nowadays are output oriented. Bigger, sell bigger calves. That comes with bigger cows, more feed, and so on and so forth. And there's got to be some middle ground there where they're big enough. You got to start looking at ways to cut some costs along the way. So that, and as far as our purebred business, I don't think we feed any better than our neighbors. We try to raise the cattle the same way they do. Of course, we feed them well, getting them ready for the bull sale and grown out. But like the heifer calves, we try to rough them and make sure that they all don't get bred, and that we have some room in there to let them naturally sort themselves.
Yeah. So speaking of the future, I guess, where do you think the future of the beef industry is, or where do you think it's going? What is it doing?
Well, I think given the U.S. beef market's competitive advantage is quality beef. So I think now quality is perceived as well-marbled beef that reached the CAB or prime spec. Now, I'm not here to say that we have to raise a bunch of primes, because there you're limiting your gene pool again. And then, I'm afraid that in the chase for prime, there'll be a lot of producers that'll lose the advantage by increased cost, and whether it be fertility issues.
Single trait selection.
Yeah, it's just we always try to think that we're multi-trait selectors.
Yeah.
And we want good terminal cattle, we want good maternal cattle, calving ease cattle, all in the same animal. And the way producers are now, most of them want it to be easy. There's ways you can optimize heterosis by having 3 breed rotations and terminal third sires and a lot of this type of thing. But most ranchers just don't have enough help, energy, or desire to spend that much time managing the breeding of their cow herd. And the way it's been going, like these Angus, a lot of these Angus commercial producers, part of the reason they like it so well, it's easy. I don't know, I'm not one of them guys, but you know what I'm saying, they got a good market, and you just go buy a bunch of Angus bulls. And
yeah.
So that's why we are so committed to the hybrid business, is because you can get some heterosis. You can use some complementary genetics, and yet it's easy.
You can turn a hybrid bull in with anything.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's kind of why we've settled more into being hybrid producers rather than the straight Simmental. Although there's always going to be a need for purebreds in these breeds. At least that's what they tell me. And we still have several.
Yeah. We like to keep less than 100 purebred cows around.
Yeah.
But just so we can, if we have a purebred bull of another breed, we can throw them on there and kind of keep our Simmental base, and whether it's Angus or Red Angus or whatever.
Yeah, most hybrid herds are based on Angus.
Yeah.
We're trying to be a hybrid bull with some Simmental in them, and not an over amount of Angus.
Yeah.
Because they're going to inevitably go onto an Angus-based cow herd. So,
but on the other side of the coin, you got to think about the Angus. They're 70% of the cattle business. There's a lot of selection going into those cattle.
Yeah.
So, and when you're not married to any particular breed and you want to raise hybrid cattle, you got to go out and find what you think your herd needs and breed to it.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe Angus, maybe Red Angus, Gelbvieh, any of these breeds if you find the right one.
Yeah.
You know.
What do you think about, I guess, the beef market and kind of what's gone on in the last couple months with this fires and stuff like that?
Well, it wasn't, what was it, about 5 years ago, the packers were losing a lot of money. And the ranchers were, and the feeders were losing a lot of money, but the ranchers were, due to the supply and demand, it's too bad there wasn't an equitable way of splitting the margins between the producer, the feeder, the retailer, and the packers equally, but it just don't work that way. And it's all just a function of who's got the leverage at the time.
Yeah.
And even though the ranchers made a lot of money in 13 and 14, I think it was really a bad thing. And it's coming home to roost now because the packers shut down so many of the packing plants. And so as there was a shortage of fed cattle back then available for the packers to kill, I mean, we'd had all the droughts and we were at, historic lows in cattle numbers. They had to, the people in the packing industry had to cut back. So now, as the herd expanded, and packing plants are another 5 years older and there's fewer of them, they've got the leverage.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just the way the world works. Whoever has the leverage kind of makes the money at the time.
Yeah.
And there's, I don't know. I'm not that big expert on that, but really what we've gone through here lately, and that fire in particular, just exposed how marginal our packing capacity is in this country.
What is some young guy wanting to get into the industry or trying to? What advice do you have? I mean, is there a future there for him in the industry as a young guy trying to get in?
I think there's lots of potential for young people. They may not be able to buy their own ranch, run their own cattle, but that might be something they can work in. But there's a lot of outside money coming into ranching, and you can bet every one of those people that are investing in ranching and land and whatnot are looking for a young man that's responsible and with desire, and you just kind of got to have faith that it'll work out if you do the right thing. And I don't know, young people can't start from scratch today.
Yeah.
And that's, to me, unless you got a wealthy relative that's ready to invest in you, you've just got to go out and work for somebody that does have the capital and
go from there, because it's tough.
Yeah.
Especially now where you got cattle prices aren't any runaway, grain's low. In this part of the world there's plenty of hay and but hard work and dedication always pays off.
Yeah. That's good. Well, with everything going on right now with this fake meat and stuff like that, what advice do you have for consumers? What do they need to know about beef so they don't have to question?
Well, I think there's a lot of things that beef has that the fake meats don't have. Plus, I think that the beef is probably a much more natural product than the processed meat. Tastes better. It's got, the amino acids and all the iron and good stuff that people need in a balanced diet. And I probably won't say that, but let's just kind of hope that, and let the consumers decide. I just can't for the life of me think that over time people are gonna quit eating meat for a synthetic meat. And hopefully this whole idea of cattle and livestock being ecologically or whatever you want to call it, unhealthy for land and carbon footprint. To be honest, I think it's nonsense. And I think in time it'll be proven to be nonsense. And if you read the right stuff now, they've already proven it's nonsense. And that's what I think.
Yeah. That's some good stuff there. So I guess kind of just wrapping up here. I guess Logan, got anything else to add? Anything we've missed? Anything, did you always want to come back to the ranch, or was this kind of how did that come about?
Well, I think it was kind of always, I was kind of always knew what I was going to do from, I was kind of thought about other stuff, but
yeah,
never, it was kind of just what I was going to do, so.
What about your brothers? I mean, because
Oh,
you got one brother that's not on the ranch and one brother that is.
No. And Austin's always kind of chose his own path, so he likes to deal with numbers more than the rest of us, so he kind of does his own thing. And then there was Brock, and he kind of found this statistics niche that he has, and which fits in pretty well with our genetic evaluation and stuff.
Yeah.
I guess we didn't really talk about our grading system. I don't know if you wanted to go into that.
I'm going to save that for another day after we've done it a few years.
Yeah, but I think, what really makes ranches work well is when you got multiple family members on the ranch, and, just like Dad and my Uncle Tom, Dad's pretty good with cows, and my uncle's pretty good with farming, and so they just kind of made that work, and they complement each other well, and that always seems to be a good thing. So everybody's kind of got to stay in their, I guess, respective skill set, and I think that's what makes ranches work really well, especially when you're dealing with family.
So when Tom retires, who's the farmer?
Oh boy,
we haven't got to that point yet. I keep thinking one of these boys might get a fetish for farming.
I think Austin would probably have to come back to the ranch for somebody to really get interested in it, but I don't know.
You just don't know.
Yeah.
We kind of got to be diversified, when sometimes when the cattle market's not very good, the grain market can be pretty good.
Yeah.
And
that's what we've always believed.
Yeah.
Right now they're both in the tank, so I guess it doesn't matter what you're doing.
And another thing that we've always done is have multiple cash flow times of the year.
Yeah.
It's nice to have something to sell, 3, 4, 5, 6 times a year. Just like the grain. One thing about it, it's always liquid. Even though it may not be worth a lot, it's always there for cash flow, and
because with the cattle you're doing, bulls, heifers, feeders. You're kind of hitting all the different spectrums to.
And like the grain thing, we've got some product differentiation in our cattle operation. And the grain farming, it's our grain's just like everybody else's grain.
Yep.
Whereas we've always, in our cattle, we're trying to have something that other people don't necessarily have, and that can help them and want to buy and willing to pay a premium for it. So that's really the main difference is, and I think that's what's exciting to the kids is differentiation of raising these cattle versus just raising grain.
Yeah.
Oh, and it kind of comes back to just getting the most value off of the feed that you produce. You're selling feed no matter what you're doing, whether you're putting it through a cow or you're sending it to the elevator. You're always selling feed.
Yeah.
So how do you make the most out of your feed? Well, you make more value in your cattle, and you make more value in your grain if you can, or try a new crop or whatever it can be. You're selling feed.
Yeah.
It's a good point.
Yeah. Well, that was a lot of fun. I think we're kind of wrapping up here. We got to go wean or catch more cows here on the mountain, so we'll kind of wrap it up here. But I just want to say thanks to you guys for letting me and my family show up, especially a day after a wedding. So I'm sure you were tired and exhausted, and after cleaning, I don't know if you guys got roped into cleaning on Sunday, but
A little bit, but not much.
a little bit, not much. Well, that's good. Well, I'm glad I got to meet Brock for a little bit before he left for his honeymoon. So, but I just want to say thanks again, guys. It's been a lot of fun. I enjoy coming to these places, and I'm glad you allowed me to show up.
You're more than welcome. I've enjoyed it too.
Oh, good. So that's a wrap. Thanks, guys. And that will do it, guys. Thank you to Jim and Logan Butcher, and thank you to you guys for taking the time to listen to the podcast. I really do appreciate it, and if you get a chance, please give me a rating on iTunes, 5 stars if you would. That'd really help me out. And if you get a chance, like and share on Facebook and Instagram and all that. So thanks, guys. Have a good one.